So do you suppose the snow, 4 feet of snow up in Newark has melted? Or Greensboro?
Sutton.
Well, I feel something quite on a cage, just in case.
Just in case.
But Larry said, I just put a paddle on that.
Yes, there you go.
Just in case.
Yeah. Because if it all melts, there's got to be water somewhere, right? Well, Howard was talking about Gary Brodas. I taught both of his children, Matt and Jesse. And I can remember Gary was a contractor, general contractor. And I can remember Matt, this would have been around 1996, 95, a lot of years ago. Matt praying every day and asking for prayer that his dad would get a job, would get a new contract or a new place to build. And then one day he came in with a praise. His dad had been hired to build a 110-room mansion. And that kept him busy for quite a while, right? So God does hear prayers, and Gary and Jean are retired at this point, and last I heard, I think they're going on a cruise to Turkey and to some of the early Christian sites here later on this year. Well, hopefully you're able to stay cool. I came in here yesterday to make sure things would work, and it was hotter then than it is now, because I figured I wasn't going to open any windows, seeing I was going to just be leaving a little bit. I just wanted to make sure things worked. Albert Einstein, most people know, is famous for his theory of relativity. But there are some other things about Albert Einstein that you might not know that were kind of unique. He sometimes, what was that?
He played the violin.
He played the violin, okay? He sometimes behaved in unexplainable ways. One thing that he just loved, and it was especially anxiety-laden for those assigned to his protection detail, was his love of sailing. And he'd often go sailing up in the Adirondacks on some of the lakes up there. And he'd take a small boat out on one of the busy lakes, and he seemed to have more fun deliberately aiming the boat into the wake of an oncoming big boat than anything else that he did. And agents on shore were panicking. He never wore a life jacket, which caused even more anxiety. But the biggest problem was Einstein didn't know how to swim. But he still loved sailing. Billy Graham tells a story about Einstein. Einstein was once traveling from Princeton on a train when the conductor came down the aisle punching tickets of every passenger. When he came to Einstein, Einstein reached in his vest pocket. He couldn't find his ticket. So he reached in his trouser pockets. It isn't there. He looked in his briefcase, but couldn't find it. Then he looked in the seat beside him, and he still couldn't find it. The conductor said, "Dr. Einstein, I know who you are. We all know who you are. I'm sure you bought a ticket. Don't worry about it." As Einstein nodded appreciatively, the conductor continued down the aisle punching tickets. As the conductor was ready to move to the next car, he turned around and saw the great physicist down on his hands and knees looking under his seat for his ticket. The conductor rushed back and said, Dr. Einstein, don't worry. I know who you are, no problem. You don't need a ticket. I'm sure you bought one." Einstein looked at him and said, "Young man, I too know who I am. What I don't know is where I'm going." So, dear Lord, we pray for your Spirit to may you move our hearts as we think about you and your love and your hope for us. In your name, amen. So, has it ever been a problem for you to know where you're going? I like to travel. I've been up to Alaska a couple times, driving the whole way, 20,000 miles each time that I went. And Mary can tell you that one of the things that happens is what is called a David Knott special. I don't know if she named it. It's possible. But it happens every now and then when we're traveling, and that's where I suddenly look in my rearview mirror and take a look and say, we're going the wrong way. We need to do a U-turn. And we turn around. In 2012, I was taking a group of students down to Williamsburg, and we had to drop off one of the chaperones at the Richmond, Virginia airport. And you know airports are one of the easiest places to drive around, right? The directions are always easy to understand and spot on accurate, right? I don't know what airport you go to, but I haven't been there yet. Because it always seems like I have to go around 3 times just to figure out which turn is going to be the right one that I'm going to need to get to otherwise. Now, compact the problem. I have 5 cars in a caravan or a motorcade getting kids down. I want to hit the right terminal the first time because everybody's following me and we're not coming back the way we came, so they have to stay with us. So one of my chaperones that year was a guy named Ray Dadgis, Isaac's father. He drives up and down the East Coast, loading and unloading cars from his car-hauling tractor trailer. I know that many men have allergies to asking directions if they're lost. They don't admit it, but their spouses will gladly proclaim the truth of the extra hours on the road because of the husband's inability to admit that he is lost. I am not one of those. I shamelessly ask for directions because I like to get where I'm going soon. In fact, I've had wife and children that wanted to duck under the seats because I was asking strangers on the street. If it's a tricky set of directions, I will ask 2 different people, or ask the first one, go as far as I can remember, and then ask the second one. But you can imagine, you can't do this when you've got 4 or 5 cars lined up behind you and you're trying to get them through stoplights and everything else. And so I did the unthinkable to truck driving Ray, who was parked right in front of the convenience store, and all the rest of us were across the street parked in a line because there wasn't enough room to park at the store. I asked Ray over the FM radio if he would go in and ask directions on how to get around the Richmond, Virginia airport. He came back on the radio very slowly, as if for extra emphasis, with a piece of wisdom. You know, Mr. Knott, real men don't ask for directions. But he was my hero that day, because he went in, asked directions, and our 5-car motorcade got it right the first time going around the Richmond, Virginia airport, and then we were able to leave. And no mix-ups. It's always nice to know where you're going and how to get there. And it's pretty basic, because we have to learn this as we are navigating life on terra firma. We first learn the boundaries of our mother's wombs, although we can't remember it. We then learn our parents' voices, the edges of the crib, the rooms in our house, and this knowledge of how to navigate to learn how to look at a map or a diagram and be able to project how he can get to some place that he's never been before. That'll come out, don't worry. About the time you need to give him the car keys. Yeah. Right. I can remember as a teenager setting off for a destination a mile away through woods, following the remains of an old abandoned road that had been there 50 years. And the only way you could tell the road was there some of the time is because the trees grew thicker in between the wheel tracks than in the rest of the forest. And in other places, it was the Davis Mine Road down in Heath, Massachusetts. It had been used, but when I came along, it had been not used for 50 years, and the woods had grown up. And there was always this sense of excitement and what's around the corner. But boy, if you didn't think, I was pretty careful to memorize from tree to tree to tree so I could get back a mile through the woods, crossing lot after lot, and get back. I had the same feeling when I got on the plane at Logan in 1976, and I was going to be going for a year as a student missionary. You feel that exhilaration, then you feel fear, and then you have exploration fever, and it's all at once, and it's all mixed up, and you usually can't separate it. Generally, life has no value unless you know where you're going and what is your destiny. The big questions of life form the mental parameters that give us the framework of what life means. Where did I come from? Why am I here? Where am I going? You sometimes hear that. The Christian apologist Ravi Zacharias often sums up these questions around with these words: origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Those are the points that everybody is actually looking for. And Christianity answers every one of these better than any other religion in the world. It answers all of them. And uniquely as Seventh-day Adventists, we have a neat perspective on that. Not knowing where we're going, if you haven't looked around recently, we are living in an epidemic of hopelessness and despair. Just a few statistics. The year 2016 saw 44,965 suicides in the U.S. It's not counting other places in the world. 2/3 of all those related deaths, all gun-related deaths, 2/3 of all gun-related deaths are suicide. So watch out when people are quoting you statistics about gun issues. White men over 65 have the highest suicide rate of any group. White middle-aged men just below that have the second highest suicide rate by any age group. One night I walked into CCB right here in town. Sat down beside the guy I'd been sitting in class for the last few weeks. His name was John Eastman. He was a middle-aged guy who had been let go from his job and was going to college to get job retraining. His interest, by the way, was growing the hottest peppers that you can grow. He brought some in and he said, "Don't even breathe over this, because you'll be sorry if you do. You hold the container like this and you go like this." It's so far off the scale with the stuff he raised. The hot scale is meaningless when he gets his stuff out. I sat down beside him and asked him how his week was. "Horribly awful," he said slowly. And I naturally asked, "Well, what happened?" And he kind of hesitated for a moment because it was like he was pondering whether he should really say what had happened. And then he explained, "My daughter's boyfriend was sitting on their bed, and without warning, he reached into the nightstand, pulled out a revolver, and pulled the trigger." And he said, "I spent the whole week trying to help my daughter get some sense of her life after that." The theory of evolution and the worldly mindset has led to impossible despair among people. Not only that, but in the cell phone age, if you are not liked by people or they are bullying you over the cell phone, people lose their confidence and become hopeless out of that also. It's more and more a phenomenon among teens these days. Someone that Rachel knew in New Zealand, they just bought a house and then invited friends to come over to help them celebrate buying the house. On the day before the celebration, after writing a short note about being upset about a situation with his job, the young man went into the garage, shut the door, and turned on the car and died of carbon monoxide poisoning. It's all around us. If you haven't run into it yet, you will. And to speak the hope that you have is so important because somebody needs to hear that. A former student of mine, an incredible athlete, lost a coaching job and then hung himself. People do not realize the impact that what they actually believe about life has an effect on their thought life and then has an effect on their destiny. If one believes in evolution, there is absolutely no right or wrong. It's only wrong because the state says it's wrong. Life is meaningless, and the pain of life can get too high. A college student won a competition here not long ago with the best definition of life by writing this. You're not going to like it. Life is the penalty we pay for the crime of being born. Think about what is said in those words. And here we have an understanding about life. And we can have such a difference. And we can make such a difference to those who are hopeless around us. I'd like you to say this one with me. Even if you can't remember anything else, you can say this to someone who is in desperate need. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And John 14, let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, ye believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. Is there hope in those words? There's powerful hope. It answers all of those questions. Some other texts before we move on. Hebrews 13:5. Jesus says, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. And Matthew 20, whoops, I went too far. Matthew 28:20, and lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. These are just a few of the amazing promises of hope that we have when we believe that what Jesus has said. God has an answer for the hopelessness and despair around us. Jesus is that answer. Do you think that God will renege on the over 1,500 times that the second coming or the day of the Lord is mentioned in the Bible? We serve a God who will do as he has promised. Yours and my mission in life, as some have stated, is to comfort the afflicted, and without any less emphasis, we also need to afflict the comfortable with the gospel. And if you don't believe that they think it's affliction sometime, just try it. We are in a war that is for keeps. I remember seeing an artist's rendering of the game of life, and here's the picture. Man is sitting at the chessboard opposite the devil, and he's playing for his life, while a good angel is trying to influence his moves. Your life and my life's destinies are being settled moment by moment, day by day, by our choices. How committed am I to Jesus? How committed are you to him? Is there anything in my life or your life that will keep us from being found wearing the robe of Christ's righteousness? Those are sobering questions. Is there anything I would not give up if Jesus asked me? What about you? It takes that complete submission to his will to truly follow him. In 1930, the United States ordered a new class of warship called light cruiser. The Uss Indianapolis was one of these. It was 610 feet long. It had a 66-foot beam, that is the distance across at the middle. She had 9 8-inch guns mounted in 3 triple turrets and had a top speed, supposedly, of 38 miles per hour. Because of her 9 8-inch guns, those are smaller than a battleship, but they're very big, she was reclassified as a heavy cruiser. She also carried 3 aircraft with catapult launchers for the airplanes. She was outfitted as a flagship for a naval commander with quarters for the naval commander's staff. So she was a special kind of ship. When they first took her out, they noticed that she rolled badly, so they had to put an extra bilge keel on the bottom, meaning rolled badly. She was top heavy, all right? And so they had to put on a bilge keel to give her more stability. From 1932 to 1940, she had all kinds of assignments. However, right at the beginning of her career, in 1932, she carried President Roosevelt from Campobello Island in Maine down to Annapolis, Maryland, including some of his cabinet. She also carried, in 1934, she carried the Secretary of the Navy on a tour of the Pacific for almost 2 months. And then in 1936, she again carried Roosevelt a 3rd time for a month on a goodwill tour of South American ports, all the way down the east side of the coast of South America. And you can see Roosevelt here with his staff. The Indianapolis was having a mock firing drill on the Johnston Atoll in the Pacific when Pearl Harbor was attacked in 1941. She was not in Pearl Harbor, she was out to sea. She vainly hunted for the attacking Japanese fleet, and then she was assigned in the South Pacific for a while. She was refitted, then sent up to the Aleutian Islands for almost a year, countering the Japanese moves there. The Japanese attacked a number of the Aleutian Islands, and the U.S. had to be careful that they did not get a foothold there, and so she was involved with that. After another refit, she became Admiral, and I hope I'm saying his name right, Admiral Spruance's flagship in the Southern Pacific. And throughout 1944, she was involved in the campaigns of the islands, the Marianas, the Carolines, Palau, in the Pacific. She again returned for a refitting to California, and then was involved in a diverting raid while the U.S. was attacking Iwo Jima. She was sent on a mission to actually bombard the coast of Japan to distract attention. But on March 31, 1945, she was desperately trying to shoot down a kamikaze attack and wasn't successful. The bomb went through the stern, all the way through the bottom of the boat, and exploded underneath. And they managed to stabilize her, and they sent her back to California to get repaired. And if you know, the war there ended in August of 1945. This was March. She was sent back, refitted, and then she was given a top secret mission. She carried the parts and the enriched uranium or the code-named Little Boy atomic bomb that would be dropped on Hiroshima on August 6th. She left California on July 16, and she set a speed record from California, from San Francisco to Pearl Harbor, that still hasn't been broken, from what I understand. She made it in 74 and a half hours with an average speed of 33 miles per hour. You can water ski behind that. This is a good ship. All right?
18 miles an hour, that's around water.
Okay. She took the top secret cargo to Tinian, where it would be assembled and put on the B-29. And we'll come back to the Independence a little later. Second Peter 3, and we'll be spending some time there, but I'll have the text up on the board here. But if you want to turn there, you can have it so you can read it yourself in whatever version you like. 2 Peter 3, and we'll be going through it. 2 Peter 3:3 talks about some of the things we'll face here just before the day of the Lord. Knowing this, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. Notice that this group points to the long passage of time as the basis for their argument that Jesus isn't coming back. The other thing to note is that their lifestyle dictates their understanding of the Word. If you go back and you look at walking after their own lusts, they have no interest in anything that God is doing. Peter continues with how they choose to think about the past. For they willingly are ignorant of that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. But the heavens and the earth, which are now, by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire, against the day of judgment and the perdition of ungodly men. Notice that this group is willingly ignorant about the creation story and then about the flood. Just think for a minute. Do you suppose that has anything to do with evolutionary theory? Peter wants us to focus on that if God did those things in the past, then he will surely fulfill his promise to end the world in fire. Peter next reminds us that God looks at and understands time in a completely different way than we do, which the scoffing group refuses to reckon with. The great passage of time since the promises were made is their argument that God cannot be trusted. It can be the biggest issue for us too. Can God be trusted with all my desires, my hopes, and my dreams when we watch year after year and we see the creep of evil coming closer and closer all around us? We can begin to get panicked if we don't have our focus where it needs to be. And he goes on to say, but beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. In other words, the time argument is totally irrelevant. It is a mental non sequitur, complete foolishness, a refusal to see how prophecies were fulfilled in the past, and that to somehow believe that the passage of time has negated the Word of God. Never go there. Never go there. It doesn't matter how long it's going to take. Those promises are sure. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some man counts slackness, but is long-suffering to usward, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Do you notice how focused he is on our destiny, not wanting that any should perish? Habakkuk says, I will stand my watch and set me upon the tower and will watch to see what he will say unto me. He's asking God. And what shall I answer when I am reproved? He's saying, God, what are you doing? Something's got to happen. How can you do this? And the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tables, that he may run that readeth it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. In other words, time is not a factor in this. Behold, his soul, which is lifted up, is not upright in him. That's speaking of the ungodly. But the just shall live by his faith. That is what we are called to do. We are called to live by faith as we look at those texts and as we look at what is coming. And we are to have the faith to understand that it will happen. It's unstoppable. It is obvious that the scoffing group has slighted God's grace and the opportunity for repentance. God wishes to save all, but he will not overrule people's choice, because that is their character and their destiny. We are built to choose, and those choices shape us into who we are and who we will be. Like freshly mixed cement, we can take on any shape, but as time goes along, it hardens and deepens our choices, and we set up like cement, and we begin to harden into the shape that we have chosen. If we have hardened somewhat, but choose to change as repentance, what do we have to do? We have to fall on the rock and be broken, and to begin the process of being reshaped as new cement again, and grow in his grace. It's not comfortable, but it's absolutely essential. Anything other than following God's will is labeled in the scriptures as lawlessness. And that's what happened to the evil angels. They chose lawlessness instead of following God. And most of the world chooses lawlessness instead of following God. As God comes to judge the world and its inhabitants, it becomes a time for seeing the effects of the choices we have made. And Jesus told the parable of the house on the sand, or the house on the rock. Those choices that we make are so important. Our God shall come. This is Psalms 50, 3-6. Our God shall come. Notice how similar it is to parts of 2 Peter. Our God shall come and not keep silence. A fire shall devour before him, and it shall be very tempestuous round about him. He shall call to the heavens from above and to the earth, that he may judge his people. Gather my saints together unto me, those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. And the heavens shall declare his righteousness, for God himself is judge himself. Selah. And Selah there means, one meaning of it is pause and calmly think about that. Notice, again, how similar parts of 2 Peter are to Psalms 50. And then Isaiah 34, all the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll, and all their hosts shall fall down, as the leaf falleth off from the vine, and as a falling fig from a fig tree. Isaiah writes it. Again, similar. These are descriptions along with 2 Peter that describe the day of the Lord. But in this time of the reeling earth and sky, we are assured by Jesus, and here are several passages that are excellent to put to memory. Isaiah 35, 3 and 4. Strengthen ye the weak hands and confirm the weak, feeble knees. Say to them that are of a fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, not upon you, but upon those who have refused him. Even God with a recompense. He will come and save you. And Isaiah 26, 3 and 4. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee. Trust ye in the Lord forever. For in the Lord Jehovah is everlasting strength. Here in this text is the incredible promise that follows the if-then statement. If the mind is stayed, pointed, focused, faithfully trusting, listening to God's will, then God will keep it in perfect, stable, unflappable, unshakable peace. Is that something you can hang your coat on? Then will happen what is described in Isaiah 30, 20 to 21. And though the Lord give you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, yet shall not thy teachers be removed into a corner any more. But thine eyes shall see thy teachers, and thine ears shall hear a word behind thee, saying, This is the way, walk ye in it, when you turn to the right hand and when you turn to the left. If you want to know God's will, what do you have to do? We've just gone through several texts that outline specifically if you want to know God's will for right this moment, for later this day, for later this week. These texts outline how it works. We must be locked in onto this submission to Jesus' will. This is the way to holiness, righteousness, and purity. It is how God can save us when we are focused on doing his will. 2 Peter, again, chapter 3, focuses on the day of the Lord, the day of judgment, and the day of his vengeance. I've got to make sure I'm on the right text here. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works therein shall be burned up. These are some of the most detailed words describing Jesus' second coming. They present a picture of incredible power of his coming, and it stands to reason why the wicked in that hour will cry for the rocks and the mountains to fall upon them, to hide them from the wrath of the Lamb. Here in Nathaniel Green's painting that's downstairs, The Blessed Hope, the coming is shown mostly from the aspect of the righteous faithful, awaiting Jesus' return. But in the background, there in almost the center of the picture, you can see the shockwave overwhelming the city. But it's not the main focus. The main focus is on those who have chosen to follow God. And that's where our focus needs to be. Peter then asks the question, the most important question to be asked about the day of the Lord. Seeing then all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness, looking for and hasting unto the coming of the day of the Lord, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with the fervent heat. The Living New Testament puts it this way. Since everything around us is going to be destroyed like this, what holy and godly lives should you live? Looking forward to the day of God and hurrying along. On that day, he will set the heavens on fire, and the elements will melt away in the flame. The Amplified Bible puts that same verses together. Since all these things are thus in the process of being dissolved, what kind of person ought each of you, or me, to be in the meanwhile, in consecrated and holy behavior, and devout and godly qualities? While you wait and earnestly long for and expect and hasten the coming of the day of God, by reason of which the flaming heavens will be dissolved, and the material elements of the universe will flare and melt with fire. Peter seems to really be homing in on the point that there is a preparation work to do today to be ready for that day. There is a decided work that I have to do, and maybe you have to do. The other day, Mary suggested that I rototill our larger 50-foot by 100-foot garden while she transplanted a bunch of winter squash that was too thick in the row before we went and picked strawberries. We thought getting the garden rototill would be better before the heat hit. To get ready, I had to have gas for the rototiller. I had to get water to drink. I had to take a large screwdriver to poke out any rock that stuck in the tines of the rototiller. I had to get at least 4 strawberry flat boxes that needed dusting out. They've been sitting in the basement all winter. And a hat to keep my bald pate from getting too sunburned, boots for wet garden dirt, and then old shoes and jeans for the strawberry patch. Yes, I always kneel and crawl on my hands and knees in the strawberry patch, and so I like to have jeans and I like to have old shoes because the stains on my pants remind me I went strawberry picking. It took a lot of gathering of stuff to get ready for a 2-stage morning. The picking was good, 50 pounds in an hour and 20 minutes. But it takes careful preparation to do those kinds of things and to get ready. It takes a much more detailed, careful preparation, a fight in yours and my mind to prepare for the day of the Lord. We must acknowledge our sin and our sinfulness. We must ask for forgiveness. Third, we must invite Jesus to come into our hearts. And fourth, we need to bring every thought into the captivity of obedience to Christ. And here we're looking at 2 Corinthians, where Paul writes, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations, and every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ." I've heard people speak about how all of those other things were out there. You know what? I find that I have to cast those things out right here between my ears. That's where the fight happens. That's where I win and lose the battle every day. And every day, it's a fight. It's the hardest fight that I'll ever put my mind to. It's the most difficult thing I will ever do, is to keep my heart submitted to Christ's will. Search me, O God, Psalms 139, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. If you are a normal human being, at some point you will recoil, just like I do, from that idea. This is where the force of our wills, the ability to make a choice, is so vital. Even though my mind fights this, I will my mind, if you get the double word there, I will my mind into Jesus' power. And even though my heart is kicking and screaming and fighting, I have to keep willing this until my heart gives in. But it takes watchfulness, because just about as soon as I willed it and I made the decision, my self-seeking desire allows it to creep in the back door again, and I have to chase it out again by submitting my will to Jesus. Sometimes it takes many times a day, and your mind gets weary from the fight. This is the old man of sin which has to die. It feels like plucking out the eye or cutting off the right hand, as Paul says. And in 1 Corinthians 15:31, and I'm only reading a part of it, I protest by your rejoicing which I have in Christ Jesus our Lord. I die daily. This is not for the faint of heart. And then in Romans 12:1-2, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God.
What was that verse?
That's Romans 12:1-2. I'm one short, I'm sorry.
I'm on Hebrews.
No? I'm ahead. There we go. All right. And once we have followed these steps through, then, what I already had up there is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. You are walking in the Spirit when your will is submitted to the great God of heaven, and you're following His law. But it takes constant vigilance. And then Paul goes on in Hebrews 12. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Looking unto Jesus, notice, the author and the finisher of our faith. If we keep our will submitted to Him, what's going to happen? He'll complete it for us. All we have to do is keep that will submitted. Believe me, that's, Lord, help my unbelief. Is like the man whose son had the demon. That's what he finally said. I believe, help my unbelief. If we have to pray that prayer, Ellen White says, God will never refuse that prayer. When you're in the thick of the battle, if you have to pray that, pray it. That's how you get back. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider Him that endured such contradiction of sinners against Himself, lest ye be wearied and faint in your minds. Jesus fought this fight, and He stayed with it to win it for you and I. And then Philippians 1:6, being confident of this very thing, that He which hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. I have nothing to fear on the day of the Lord when I am submitted to His will. I have nothing to fear. That is how I can be redeemed and saved for eternal life in Jesus. We left off the story of the Uss Indianapolis after she made that record-breaking trip carrying the stuff from Pearl Harbor to Tinian. At Guam, she received orders to join her units near Leyte in the Philippines. Many of the original sailors' time in the Navy was up, so at Guam, a whole bunch of the crew switched. Even before heading out across the Philippine Sea, Captain McVeigh asked for a destroyer escort because his ship had no submarine detection and no submarine protection. And up to that point in World War II, no warship of that category that didn't have submarine protection had ever gone unaccompanied across the Philippine Sea without the protection. He was told by the immediate superior, not the high-up admirals, no, there's virtually no risk. It's so small, it's nothing to worry about. You're going across by yourself. He kept asking, but they refused his request. In reality, top secret Navy intelligence knew that there were 2 Japanese submarines directly in his path because they had broken the Japanese code and they knew exactly where those submarines were. McVeigh was told to do a zigzag pattern at his own discretion. He did so. But on midnight of July 30th, it was so inky black the sailors couldn't even see one another a few feet from each other. He said, zigzagging is pointless. Nobody can see us in the dark. And so he stopped zigzagging. But it was, again, as he thought, as he desired. Larry Whitehead, this is a piece of the story that is kind of amazing. Larry Whitehead, who used to live right across the street from the church here, told me that he had seen the last, or been right close to the last hostile action where a Navy ship had been sunk on July 24, 1945. The USS destroyer Underhill was sunk by a Japanese suicide midget sub. And Larry had been on an LST, and he said that was the last naval ship that was sunk. He didn't know about the Indianapolis. Larry had told me to find the headstone of the USS Underhill at Arlington National Cemetery. And one of the last trips when I was there, I started looking for it. He says it's along the path coming down from the JFK Memorial. And there it was, the USS Underhill. But he didn't know about the USS Indianapolis. About 14 minutes after midnight on July 30th, the Indianapolis was struck by 2 out of 6 torpedoes. She sank in 12 minutes, split in 2. It was one of the deadliest torpedoes that the Japanese had produced. Ironically, Japanese submarine I-58 had left Japan at almost the same time that the USS Indianapolis had left California. It was one of the last submarines to be launched. And distress signals were sent out, 3 of them. And later it was found that those 3 had been received, but they were ignored. The men were in the water for 5 nights and 4 days because of dehydration and serious shark attacks and salt poisoning. Only 316 survived. All of them with serious post-traumatic stress syndrome. It was the Navy's single largest loss of life in World War II. And nobody knew, because the Navy only kept track of ships by when they were scheduled to arrive. They didn't cross them off when they came into port. It had gone that way throughout the whole war. And the USS Indianapolis, nobody knew that it had been sunk. It was supposed to arrive 4 days ago. They crossed it off the list because, of course, it must have arrived. It hadn't arrived. The Navy put together a court-martial of Captain McVeigh. But to give you an idea how unhappy admirals in the Navy were, Admiral Nimitz, who had controlled a large part of the Pacific operation, refused to accept the court-martial and instead reinstated McVeigh as a captain on a ship. McVeigh was the only captain out of any of World War II ships that were sunk to be court-martialed. And many people say that the Navy only court-martialed them to cover their mistakes. A 7th grader in 1996, his name Hunter Scott, did a report on the USS Indianapolis that started to unravel the mystery about its end. And in the year 2000, Congress passed a resolution exonerating Captain McVeigh of any wrongdoing. President Bill Clinton signed it, and in 2001, the Secretary of the Navy posthumously cleared McVeigh of all charges. The USS Indianapolis appears to be the last surface ship. There was a submarine sunk later. The last surface warship lost to hostile action in World War II. The ship lies on the bottom, 18,000 feet down. That, to give you an idea, you would have to walk the length of this road 10 times to get to a mile. It's 3.5 miles down. All right? And it was found there by the late billionaire Paul Allen, who co-founded Microsoft with Bill Gates. So why did I include this story? Kind of a strange story to be included in a sermon. Think about the Israelites going through the desert. Did they want to trust their commander? Did they want to second guess him when they didn't have water? When they didn't have food? Did he bring them through?
Yeah.
When he told them to go forward, what did they do? They said, we won't go. When he told them not to go, what did they do? Well, then we'll go. Sometimes we mix up the God of the universe with the U.S. Navy. And we get it wrong. And the point is, the God who sends us out doesn't make those kind of mistakes. He's interested in my life from the day I was born to the day I die. And he wants me to save me for eternity, and wants to save you. And that's where it says that in Revelation we have to have the faith of Jesus. We have to have that faith in Jesus no matter what is going on around us, no matter what it looks like. We can count on him. And when I'm saying that, I have to live it and learn it just like you do. It's just as hard for all of us. Isaiah 43. But now thus saith the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed thee, and I have called thee by thy name. Thou art mine. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee. And through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. And when thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. For I am the Lord thy God, the Holy One of Israel, thy Savior. Another story. Margot Bachmann was born October 25, 1944, in Heidelberg, Germany. But much of the rest of her story is not ordinary. Bachmann's mother, originally from Italy, had come to work during the war in a German factory and then was forced to live in a labor camp. While there, she got pregnant at 20 from a German soldier. I'll just leave it at that. Shortly after Margot was born, German authorities forced Margot's mother to give Margot to the state. Margot was at a children's home a short time until just after the war, when the German soldier's family adopted her. Margot always knew she was adopted, and her father always told Margot that her mother died, but Margot didn't really believe it. Her father, throughout his life, prohibited Margot from trying to find her biological mother. And now switching the story to the mother's side. After giving up her daughter to the German authorities, Margot's mother, in the post-war European chaos, eventually returned to her hometown in Italy, all the while believing that her daughter, Margot, had been killed. After Margot's father died, Margot decided to go against his wishes. Fortunately, the Nazi government was the most meticulous government of government records in the world. And she was able to locate her original birth certificate And on that birth certificate, she found the full name of her mother. I wanted to know who my mother was, she says, whether we were similar, and I wanted to find photos or some information about her. And I didn't dare hope that I would ever be able to hug her, Margot told the newspaper. Margot then took her mother's full name to the International Tracing Service and their 30 million documents. Fortunately, in all the years, Margot's mother had never moved away from her home village in Italy, which made the tracing quick and relatively easy. And she got the word, yes, her mother was still alive. Here's an excerpt from Margot's letter to her mother, introducing herself to her mother. Dear Mom, my name is Margot Ottman, and I am your daughter, born on October 25, 1944 in Heidelberg. All my life I've asked my family about you without being given any answers. I want to come and find you so that I can hug you once again. I'm immensely happy to be able to finally know you. On August 8, 2015, after 71 years, Margot, 71, and her mother, 91, were reunited in the Italian town of Novarella. The International Tracing Service and the International Red Cross, who helped do the tracing, were on hand for the joyous reunion. Margot told the services who helped find her mother, now I'm overtly happy that she's doing well and that we are able to get to know each other. Meanwhile, Margot's mother said, as she looked at her daughter, I thought you were dead. Otherwise, I would have searched for you. Can you imagine Jesus wished to be reunited with you and me? He died on the cross just to rescue us from eternal death. Far more than Margot Bachman, he has been searching for us all of our lives, hoping that we will come to him, accept his plan for our lives, and follow him to change us. Yes, change our characters to be like him, while we accept his righteousness. Am I willing to let him do this? Are you willing to let him do this? Today is the day to choose him.